Welkom Jelle. So glad you've decided to join us for another installment of THEO-LOGIE. We right now want to continue on with the conversation that we had last installment, where we're talking about the biblical material and how we use it, how it shapes a life. And we suggested that maybe we need to move away from the idea of the Bible as an owner's manual for life. What guides and directs the question that we raised at the end of the last video clip is, how do you know what material to apply and what material not to apply? And we said that how you shape the text will determine how the text shapes you. If it's an owner's manual, then it's going to shape you by extracting propositions and applying them. And of course, the guiding question when you're reading the biblical material becomes, what of this material that I'm reading is eternal and relevant truth? And what in this material is cultural and therefore no longer relevant truth? And that's been a guiding question that we've had in biblical studies for quite some time. But maybe that's the question that's getting us into trouble. Maybe that's the question that's creating this two-bucket theory. Which bucket of material does this go in? Is it the irrelevant bucket or the relevant bucket? Is it the cultural bucket or the truth bucket? Maybe there's a better way to get at it. And one of the things that I want to suggest is that we as a Christian community need to start thinking through what other metaphors would help us see that the biblical material inspired by God, given for our profit, given to help us, how is it going to mold and shape a life? And I want to just suggest there's a couple options. I think one of the most fruitful metaphors I've heard that I'm picking up on from a New Testament scholar named N.T. Wright is the idea that the biblical material is 4 acts of a 5-act play. It's just 4 acts. And that the 5th act is actually how you and I live out and improvise the first 4 acts. If we immerse ourselves in the plot and the storyline and the character development of the first 4 acts, the biblical material, and if we recognize that in those first 4 acts, there's hints of how the play actually comes to conclusion. You can think of Romans 8 here. The whole creation is groaning and travailing in pain until now. Or 1 Corinthians 15, that there's going to come a time when everyone experiences resurrection. There's hints of the conclusion. What would it be like for us as a Christian community now, a group of gifted actors and actresses, to immerse ourselves in the biblical material, the biblical storyline, and then in the context of community, improvise the 5th act? That is, live out in the context of our lives and in our culture with the questions we have and the understandings of God we have. How would we improvise that 5th act, knowing that 5th act has to have continuity with the first 4 acts? It has to have the same plot and storyline, but that it will actually get at answering questions the first 4 acts don't address, because the first 4 acts are only focused on those 4 acts. So the 5th act has questions like about nanotechnology, or in vitro fertilization, or artificial insemination, or nuclear disarmament, or human slavery, or a number of other things that maybe the biblical material doesn't directly address. There's no chapter and verse that address it. What will we do? Well, I think the idea of the biblical material as a script that we immerse ourselves in, and then in the context of community, we begin to play off of each other as a group of gifted actors and actresses so that the material is then lived out in real life. I think that's a fruitful metaphor. I think the idea of a jazz score is a similar metaphor, where we, in the context of a jazz improvisational community, we begin immersing ourselves in the score of the biblical material. And we come to know it so well that as we improvise in our lives, we begin to live out that biblical score with new harmonies and new melodies and new notes. Notes that are maybe inherent in the script, but are getting unpacked through our lives in the improvisation of it. And again, it's done in the context of community. It's the jazz ensemble, riffing with each other, holding each other accountable to the score, but helping each other soar and move beyond the score as we improvise. I just want to suggest that those are 2 possible metaphors, but that maybe we as a community need to begin exploring, how does an inspired ancient text shape a human life in powerful and transformative ways, but done in the context of community? If you want to explore more of these sorts of topics, transformation and spiritual formation, I want to invite you to take a look at www www.tttribe.com, where in the Transformational Truck Tribe, we're exploring some of these questions as well in getting at the issue of transformation. Thanks for tuning in this edition. We'll look forward to seeing you again in the future.